So Rick, we've been doing press releases now for 5, 6 years together. I think a lot of founders think that press releases and media, public relations and media outreach is this like black box. So why don't we break it down into like the core pillars that it actually is? So I guess, why don't you tell us first and foremost about messaging and just getting that right?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Kevin. It is kind of a mystery to people who have spent all their life focused on other areas. And it can seem overwhelming, or it can seem like a mystery, like you're saying. But really, it can be broken down into 3 or 4 fundamentals. And it starts with messaging and understanding, what you're trying to communicate and who you're trying to communicate to. And really, what you want to make sure is you're taking your story, crafting your message. You know what your product is all about. And you maybe know the technical aspects of it, but the people you're selling to don't. And so taking your message and distilling it into something that is understandable by your audience is incredibly important. And that's really your first step. And when we're devising a press release or any kind of messaging, that's where we start.
There's a couple pieces of that I find interesting. So first and foremost, typically the startup, they know their news. Whether it's a fundraising announcement, whether it's a new product release, whether it's some new AI capabilities, whether it's a new executive hire. So typically the startup is very excited about whatever news they have.
Yeah.
And the process is then, how do you connect their news to something thematic happening in the industry, to some topic that some writer is interested in? Because at the end of the day, our job is to bridge their news, and once you get that good messaging down, into what's happening in the world, because in the end of the day, that's what's going to get it picked up. And the other piece of that too, it's like writing press releases is very different than writing blogs, right? Like when you work with a great content marketer, they're super big on narrative and storytelling, and it's very artful. And press releases, yes, they're artful, but at the end of the day, it's news, and so it has to be written in a way that is news. And so I think that's an interesting piece too, right? It's knowing how to write something, and depending on what the news is, there's a lot of different formatting options that exist for media folks like you and I.
I was just looking at this literally this morning, actually, and even with somebody who's been doing PR for a couple of decades, it's always good to review and refresh these things, because when you're talking about search engine optimization, those rules change sometimes, and you really want to understand how to frame these things up and how important it is to get right to the most critical aspects of the news in your headline, in your subhead, in your first paragraph, so that whether it's ChatGPT or whether it's Google or whoever it is who's out there looking for your news, you're giving authoritative information right up front. So that right there is the crux of the difference between a press release and, as you're saying, a blog post, which can be a little bit more informal, which can have a little bit more of a personal side coming from a founder, which is good content too, and something you want to have on a blog. But when you're talking about a press release, who, what, when, where, why is still critical to be upfront in your press release.
100%. Yeah, you got to cut to the chase pretty quickly. And I think that's where the product marketing angle also is really helpful. When you think about like what is good product marketing, it's when you read something about a product, do you quickly understand what it is, who it's for, and what the value is? And that can get really opaque really quickly when people are writing these long, bloated sort of descriptions of what's happening with a product. And that same tactic is relevant for the news. And instead of positioning the product, you're positioning the company.
Right. And a lot of companies think that the purpose of the press release is to get every single bit of information out there. And it's really not. That can be overwhelming. If you have a press release where you're trying to get out 6, 7 pieces of information, it's too much. A reporter doesn't know what the most important thing is, what they should include, what they shouldn't include. A potential prospect or customer is looking at this and it's overwhelming for them. It's really important. And this is the role that PR people play, is to say to a founder, hey, listen, this is all really interesting for you, and I get that, but it may not be all really interesting for your audience, which initially is the reporter, but then is a prospective customer. So let's really take a look and say, what's the most important thing here? What are we really trying to communicate? And do these other elements, are they supporting elements, or are they other things that maybe we don't need for this press release?
100%. And we run into this all the time, you and I, where, you have to make a judgment call. Do we think this news can get picked up?
Right.
If it's a yes, and we're going to get into like the next pillar here in a second, right? Beyond just the crafting the message and the story, but then there's media outreach, right? But if it's not going to get picked up, or we don't have confidence it'll get picked up, it's still worth doing a press release. Why don't you talk about that?
Yeah. So, the press release for a long time was the absolute staple of the PR industry. And then as technology and the internet came along, it became kind of seen as old school, and it lost some of its weight. But recently it has started again to be seen as something that's important. And the press release isn't necessarily something that a reporter is going to look at and say, oh, wow, I've got to write this up just as it's written here. Let me go regurgitate these facts. But they are going to take it and they are going to say, okay, what's important for my audience? Press releases also do other things, even if it doesn't get that editorial coverage that you're looking for. It becomes a statement of record. It shows people when you put it on your website, and when people go to your website to find out what you're about, what are you doing, and they see that you have a press room that's got 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 press releases over the last year, the immediate impression is, oh, okay, this is a going business. These people are doing things. Let me check it. Oh, wow, I see they've raised money. They've hired a new CMO. They've got 3 new product launches in the last year. All right, this is a real company that's really doing things, right? So for that reason alone, it's worth doing a press release. Then, as we said, there is the SEO elements to it. More and more, we're seeing that people are using things like Claude and ChatGPT and Perplexity and these other AI tools to do their searching. And those AI tools put great credibility behind press releases. So there are strong reasons to do a press release, even if it doesn't directly lead to editorial coverage.
100%. All right. So we've talked about crafting the message, putting together the release, going back to where we started with, sometimes PR can be this black box. What's next? What's the next pillar that we should talk through?
Well, I would just say, research is important as well. You touched on it a little bit ago, Kevin. What are the outlets that this news might be relevant to? Who are the reporters at these outlets who cover these sorts of things? You don't just write a press release and then put in 15 different or 100 different email addresses and hit send. Nobody likes receiving those types of emails. They're not effective. So it's about taking a pause and saying, okay, who is our audience here? Who's most likely to find this information interesting? And that's when you're going to really dig into your media research. Again, whether that is podcasts, whether it is trade publications, tech business publications, newsletters that are on Substack. There's a lot of different places where your news ultimately can land. And then even within those, there are different reporters at many of these places, some of which are really interested in construction tech, right? And some of which aren't. And they're covering, multi-million-dollar companies that are only working in a certain area or something like that. You really have to understand who the journalist is, what they write about, what they don't write about, and take the time to read some of their previous articles so that you can go out to them with a pitch that says, hey, this is relevant to you and it's relevant to your readers.
Absolutely. And I think there's 2 big pieces to this. One is being proactive and bringing interesting insights to those relevant reporters is actually a huge competitive advantage when it comes to doing media right. And so just taking Bridget as for instance, right? They did in January the state of workforce planning, right? And they leveraged all this proprietary internal data to create a data report. And so when they went to reporters, they had ammunition to say, hey, here's our point of view, here's our perspective, here's what we see that's happening in the industry that's interesting. And reporters had something to latch onto. And so I think that's also a huge part of doing that research is actually coming with a perspective. If you just show up with like, hey, here's this news, we hired someone, no one cares. But if you're bringing data that helps a reporter plug that into whatever they're already thematically covering, I think that's really important. The other piece is when it comes to construction tech, the media outlets are way more fragmented than other industries, right? There's who's hot in construction tech. You know, you have the Bricks and Bytes of the world, and you know, Last Week in Contact, and you have all these sort of smaller pubs that are all followed really well by our industry, and they're a little bit harder to sort of find and keep track of, but they are who is relevant for our audience. And so that's where the focus needs to be. And to your point, blasting out 1,500 BCCs on an email is not going to get you the results you want.
Yeah, I think another element that sometimes a founder or a CEO might miss is how strapped for time journalists are in 2026. They've got the pressure from their editors to say, hey, I need you to be cranking out X number of stories a day or a week or whatever it is. And those stories have got to really do numbers for them, right? So on one end, they're getting that pressure. On the other side, they might be getting 20, 30, 40, 50, depending on the outlet, pitches a day from companies that are saying, you know, like you mentioned, Kevin, hey, here's our new product, you know, write about us. Or we just hired somebody, write about us. And there's no context. There's no meaning behind these things. These reporters are just getting blasted. So when they receive a pitch that says, this is the news, here's why it's relevant, here's how it connects with some of the other things that you've written about, here's how it connects with what's going on in the industry right now, and you gave a great example with Bridget, here's some proprietary research that we've done, here's some insight that we have and a POV that we have. You've already done so much of the work for the reporter that it makes them want to work with you, and it makes them see you as a trusted source and as a credible source. That's all part of the research. That's all part of the work that goes on behind the scenes when a PR agency is working to get a placement for you. And it's not always something that's appreciated or understood, but it's really critical.
It's definitely not appreciated. I think people hold their hat on writing the release. And especially now with AI, you know, people can pump out a release and say like, oh, I did the thing. The media outreach, like, yes, the strategy, yes, the research, yes, the curated, the hit list of sort of outlets you want to target, all of that's huge. People do not appreciate or realize the pitching that goes involved. It is 100% a sales cycle that is actively occurring with dozens of outlets simultaneously. And so crafting that pitch, like you're saying, it is an art form to put an email or a phone call with the script related to that email in front of a reporter that gets them to go, ooh, right, we connected the dots for them already. So they just go, oh yeah, this makes sense. It clicks. I'm already covering this. This is relevant for my audience.
Yeah, think about how many emails you get personally a day, and how many of them do you never open, just automatically delete, right?
A lot.
Think about the filtering system the reporter has to have. If they were to open and read every single email they got in a day, that's all they would do. So they have to develop a very keen sense of, you know, what's BS and what's good stuff, right? And they have time to maybe take a look at an email subject line, and that's a whole other topic we can talk about at another time, how important an email subject line is. They have time to maybe read that, and then you've got, if that was good enough, maybe they give you the opening sentence of an email. If that doesn't immediately tell them that this is of value, they hit the delete button and they move on. it's a real, as you said, it is an art and a science to be able to craft these things in a way that gets somebody to open them and consider them.
All right, Rick. So we've created this story. We've picked some wire service, which you and I could geek out on in another video, but we've picked some wire service. We've also put it on our website, obviously. We've done the social with it, and we've done a ton of media outreach, which, by the way, that media outreach might be happening, is likely happening before the news goes live. Then you have decisions like exclusive versus broad outreach, which is a whole nother topic. What else is really important when it just comes to getting the news out there?
I think you can't underestimate the importance of perseverance, and also having an understanding that sometimes it's about the long game. You may send an email to a reporter and not get any response. So you go back a couple days later, hey, and you give them another reason to consider your news. Maybe something else has happened. Maybe you're giving them a new angle, but you go back to them. You might go back to them a couple times. And you know what? For any number of reasons, they're not going to write your story this time. Not a problem. You don't take them off your list forever. You don't blacklist them. You go, okay, and you move on. You may go back to this particular reporter 2, 3, 4, 5 times and not get a response, not get a story. That doesn't mean that you are dead to them or that they should be dead to you. It may just be that they're not familiar with you and they don't really understand the connections yet. That happens. But you know what? That second time they see an email from you, the third piece of news that they give you, or that you give them rather, you're still building a relationship there. And it just takes time for a reporter to get to understand your style, the news that the company is putting out, all of these different factors. I've had this happen to me many times throughout my career where it feels like you're just throwing something out to the void and it's going into a black hole of nothingness. And then all of a sudden, 3 months later, this reporter gets back to you and says, hey, I'm working on a story about XYZ. I know you guys are in this area. Is your CEO available to talk about boom, 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 right? That didn't happen for no reason at all. It happened because you sent them a good story, a good pitch, a good email 2 or 3 or 4 times, and now it's clicked for them.
You touch on sort of the next piece of where this lands, which is, okay, a reporter gets back to you and says, I'm interested. And from my experience, and I'm sure you would agree, oftentimes that because they are so busy and because they do kind of have the power in the dynamic, if you will, you'll get a reply that just says, I'm interested. And then we know it's like dating. Now we're like nursing it to like, that's fantastic. Right? Here's more information on the news. And you're trying to like coax them into biting more. But eventually, if you are successful, they're going to want to have the founder, the CEO, some executive come and talk because the interview, the news is like the press release is that like substantiated record, if you will, like as you mentioned earlier, but it's that conversation with the founder that puts character on the release in a way that tells the reporter like, oh yeah, they are interesting. They're doing cool things. They do have a point of view.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's really the goal you're looking at, right? You want to have not just the press release regurgitated into a story. You want to be able to add in a little bit more color that comes from an interview with that founder, with that CEO, as you mentioned. And that's why secondary messaging points are so important, and really having a clear understanding of how you want to communicate with this reporter that you're now going to have maybe 30-minute conversation with. It's very easy to get into one of these sorts of a Zoom call or whatever it is with the reporter, and all of a sudden you find yourself going down these tangents that no longer make any sense to the story you're trying to tell, right? Message discipline is really important. Otherwise, you can you can really sabotage yourself by diluting your own message. So it's important to know going into this sort of conversation, hey, how does this reporter like to structure their stories, right? What are they looking for in a story? What can this CEO, what can this founder tell them that is something more than just, hey, here, let me tell you more about my specific product. What can I tell this reporter about the industry, about this particular technology and the effect it's having on the industry, right? So on some level, you want to broaden out a little bit. On some other elements, you want to maybe get more specific, but having those message points ready before the interview is really important.
Yeah, those key points, right? And at the end of the day, what's that saying? It's like tell them what you told them, and tell them again.
Right.
If you have, three bullets with sort of 3 words per bullet that are like the main takeaways you want this reporter to have, you do have to have that message discipline, because just like doing a conversation like this, it is so easy to just get interested on a thread and go down that thread. And then next thing you know, what are the 3 things the reporter took away? It's not the 3 things you wanted them to take away. Right. And, in construction tech, when it comes to smaller publications, it's a little safer, it's a little more informal, but you and I have been on calls where it's earned media with TechCrunch or it's earned media with Forbes. That's a whole different story. Now we're doing significant pre-interview prep. We're bringing in a media consultant to give the media training to that founder. And then we're in Slack with the founder, like, rein it in, you're going too long, because to your point, like having that discipline to get the right points across is so critical. And obviously, like, some founders are better at it than others. Right. So there's like some naturalness to it, but you can train this. It is a skill. You watch founders of like Airbnb over the course of Brian Chesky over 15 years. Like when he gives interviews, if you look at the beginning versus now, like it is a learned skill. And so,
yeah, I've worked with several founders who have said, no, I got it. It's fine. Don't worry about it. When we've suggested doing some media practice or training, they get into that interview and now they're stumbling all over the place and they're talking about this and they're talking about that. And then we do a debrief afterwards. And invariably they say, yeah, I probably should have done a little more, review and practice ahead of time. So don't learn that lesson the hard way. Yeah. Go ahead and take the 35, 40 an hour, whatever it is, and make sure you're comfortable with what you're going to say and what you're not going to say. Because there are things that you don't necessarily want to say in these types of interviews as well.
Totally. There's a ton of things you don't want to say. And reporters are going to ask those pieces because let's not forget, these are reporters, especially when you get to the biz pubs like Wall Street Journal. Like, they would love to break news. They would love to have you say something that is not supposed to be public, like revenue figures or some proprietary thing that's just not out there yet. Yeah. So you have to be really, really careful about that. The other thing too is people may not be aware of this, but these reporters are going to substantiate a lot of what you say about your product, your service, your company. And that may include talking to a customer, talking to one of your customers. And so that media prep and getting those points honed in might extend itself to a customer, one of your startup's customers, which is a little bit of an art too, right? Because it needs to be authentic and you want them to share their experience, and hopefully you're bringing friendlies, right, to that reporter, but you do kind of have to prep them as well.
Yeah, it's a great point, actually. If you can, this is another way to turn what could have been a 3 or 4 paragraph story into a 7 or 8 paragraph story, right? To be able to say to the reporter, hey, that was a great chat you had with the founder. Can I get you in contact with a client or a customer of this person? Can I get you in touch with an investor of this company? Somebody else who can provide a different perspective on this piece of news is something that a reporter will often want to have for their story. So be thinking about that ahead of time as well. And if you can offer it proactively, that's terrific.
Yeah. And there's tons of other little tips and tricks, like time of day that your release goes live that we've learned about, what day it is, how long you let the news cycle go for before you have the next release, right? You don't want to sort of kneecap yourself. And so we could go on and on and on forever, but we were just focused here today on how to create news, or what is the news, how to create story behind it, and how to distribute that and get in front of reporters.
Another thing to mention in there as well is, okay, now that your story has run, now what? Right? And there are ways in which you can take that story and package it and merchandise it and extend its life and amplify the news. So that's another thing that we can maybe talk about at a further one of these conversations down the road.
Yeah, definitely. And people, I mean, the value of having a TechCrunch or a Forbes or a Wall Street Journal sort of bite, with their brand and your brand, and they picked up some news about you is talk about the credibility effect is huge.
Yeah, absolutely. And, again, we talk about research and strategy. That's another thing we want to consider. Is this a trade story or is it something larger? Does it make sense for us to be in TechCrunch for this news at this time? It might, but it might not. And that's a conversation that happens in the background as well, because they do different things for you at different times. And it's really about, what are the business goals? Are you trying to get more customers? Are you trying to raise more money? Are you trying to hire talent, right? Those are questions that we'd also ask before we do the media pitching, because you want to make sure that your business goals are in alignment with the outlet you're going to try to be working with.
Totally. If you're recruiting, you want to be in a different place, right? If you're recruiting software engineers, you want to be where they are. If you're trying to get investors, then you want to be where they are, so it's totally different outcome, totally different goals, and then different places you want to land. So, all right, I could go on, and I know you could forever. So we'll put a pin in it here for now, and we'll pick up PR another time.
Sounds good.